Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 115, featuring Will Martino, the president and co-founder of Kadena, the blockchain for business. Welcome, Will. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, David.
Thank
I'm
you for
doing very
joining.
well.
I'm glad you're doing good, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I've been looking at your website and really learning a bit more about Kadena, which is kadena.io, and I think it's a really cool use case as somebody who works full-time in fintech, and I have a lot of experience dealing with kind of TradFi and the on and off-ramp solution from kind of the crypto world into the TradFi and into the fiat world is a very important piece, and I think what Kadena is trying to do is offer a more institutional blockchain solution. So really grateful to have you here. So welcome everyone to the show. My name is David Chroma. I'm your host. I go by Chrome in the metaverse. And today we're really looking at the institutional use cases for blockchain in general. And I think Kadena, as it builds itself as the blockchain for business, is a really interesting use case to discuss. And I think it will lend itself well to the conversation around, how do kind of institutional blockchains maybe differ from your typical decentralized either Bitcoin or Ethereum in the programmable sense, and how can kind of blockchain technology improve the banking system as well as really just how businesses do business and handle sales and handle all kinds of different functions at their business, right? And I think when we look at this conversation, a lot of what comes up is the big question around decentralization, right? And how important is it that a blockchain is incredibly decentralized on a global scale, right? And if you don't have kind of that decentralized piece, which is really what makes kind of the crypto blockchains what they are, is it just really like a distributed ledger technology, which is kind of internal and more closed off as opposed to some of the Ethereum and kind of Bitcoin way of handling the blockchain conversation? So that's what we're going to get into a little bit today with Kadena, and I'm not sure actually where they land specifically on the whole decentralization conversation, so Will's going to let us know about that. But maybe before we dive into all that wonky conversation, Will, I'd love to hear a little bit of background about yourself and really, what brought you to blockchain and Web3 and crypto, and just a little bit of background on your own professional career. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. So my background starts at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was there helping to build out their high frequency trading analytics platform that's now nationally rolled out in the United States. I was kind of their resident young hacker, working with a bunch of other PhDs, and I was the only one without one. And it was very funny having like 50-year-olds who were like technically at the same level as me, but this is all boring government stuff for like why that was the case. And I was there when Valerie founded the crypto working group, and she needed a tech lead who had the clearance and also was a native born citizen and didn't own any coins and was at the SEC. So instead of buying Bitcoin at 80, I raised my hand and was like, all right, I'll do it. So I did
Wow.
that for about 6, 9 months. It was only at the SEC for about a couple of years, and then left and went to what is now Recurse Center, but back in the day was Hacker School,
Mm.
and just was focusing on Haskell. And Stuart Popejoy was running this R&D desk. My co-founder, Stuart Popejoy, was running this R&D desk at JP Morgan, working on just like, different stuff inside of the bank. It wasn't blockchain yet. And I was his second hire at this desk. And pretty quickly, because Ethereum was getting ready to be rolled out, they were doing kind of the roadshow around to the different banks, talking about, banking, like the future of banking, and how blockchain could, be involved with having, a programmable ledger and the importance of, what programmable money is. So we started doing a bunch of DD on a due diligence and research on these different platforms for JP Morgan. And pretty quickly, we were just like, all right, the best way to figure out how this stuff works is to build our own. So we ended up building JP Morgan Coin version 0, rolled that out, got a bunch of press about it. And over the course of those 2 years that we were working on blockchain there, we have the Center of Excellence for Blockchain at JP Morgan formed around us. We were working right next to what became the Quorum people. And we were the first ones to roll ours out. And then after we left, they switched from our platform to the Quorum platform, which they've rolled out, and now are having some surprisingly scaling issues with. Because that's what happens when you have a single, just a single ledger, is you're going to have scaling issues. And so Stuart and I just had this list of questions that we had from JP Morgan of like, all right, look, we believe in the future of this technology. We think that by 2030, it's going to be integrated in a really significant way. I don't think we've had that integration yet, but I think that especially after BlackRock getting involved and now like the way that banking is going, and also just the change in perspective from the US side when it comes to crypto that's coming this year.
Seems to be, yeah.
That adoption, I think, is going to be there and it's going to stick. But we knew that there was just a bunch of these features that were going to be needed for real institutional adoption. So we left to go and build it. First, we were focused on institutional blockchains. So these are the private chains that people probably remember from like 2015, 2016. They never really went anywhere, but it was an easier way for banks to start to play with this stuff. The main way that we were, addressing the issues that we saw at JP Morgan, and really just for institutions in general, is we looked at the EVM and Solidity, and just thought to ourselves, this needs a safer language, and it needs, if we can have a language that doesn't have to be programmed by real engineering experts, but could actually be read and maybe written by just technical experts, so lawyers or traders or something. So we built this scripting language called Pact that has just a bunch of stuff that we're not going to go into on this call because I could talk for hours just about the features inside of Pact. But the gist of it is that it's a scripting language that is our smart contract language and our application runtime. That is just it was way ahead of its time back in the day. It's still, I would say, pretty ahead of its time.
So when was this, when you were creating this? It was like 2017,
This was, it was just like 2017, 18. And after about a year of working on the institutional side, I think it was Cardano. I think we were talking to Cardano's founder. And
Charles.
he was like, why are you guys doing,
Hoskinson.
why are you guys doing it was early when he was still doing his raises.
Nice,
He was like, why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing a public network? Your language is amazing. Why aren't you doing a public network? And so we started thinking about it. And then we were trying to figure out, should we do proof of stake? Should we go with the traditional proof of work? Proof of work has a problem of being slow and it's not really scalable. Proof of stake has a lot of advantages from the point of view of fast finality, but you end up with a much more centralized ecosystem. Even if you can decide to you can kind of pretend that it's not centralized, but it ends up being almost always pretty centralized. And the big VCs and the bigger banks kind of hold most of the coins. It's not all of them, but it's most of them. And but you still have this issue of just scaling. And from our point of view, the biggest impediment to true adoption is the issue of gas fees. Of you can have a faster network like a Solana that's going to handle in reality probably around 10K to 15K transactions a second. It can boost, depending on what the use case is, it can boost up above that. But those are specific use cases when you have a concurrent runtime. But at the end of the day, you have global adoption of technology blockchain. You're going to have so many transactions going through that the gas price eventually is going to creep up because you're going to hit whatever your cap is for your scaling. This is way before layer 2.
Even a Solana is going to face that problem eventually, even though their gas fees are so tiny.
Yeah, they've had it before too.
Yeah,
they've had it before. This was, I think it was 3 years ago or something. This was also, I think, partially was a problem with the consensus, because their consensus runs.
Yeah, they've had some critical failures for sure. I don't think it's been
this isn't one of their
failures.
Yeah, this isn't one of their failures.
Okay.
This was they were having some great adoption, and this is the CryptoKitties problem that Ethereum had, where all of a sudden you have CryptoKitties comes out, everyone wants to do it, gas prices spike through, and then they come back down.
Yeah,
and Solana had this. I think it was 3 years ago, where the gas price spiked from being pennies, which is, in my opinion, the gas price should always be just above what the anti-troll price is. Of it's too expensive for you to troll, and then everything else after that, that shouldn't be. That's what the price should be. It's an anti-DDoS measure,
kind of a
to make sure that people are using
more than anything else. Yeah,
yeah, that's it. And it shouldn't be every penny above that is always going to be just because you don't have the scaling that you need. So and Solana had this where I don't remember exactly what the app was, but there was some app. I think it was one of their dexes, and it was something else, and just it was getting hammered. And also the consensus wasn't as efficient as it is now. So there's a bunch of messaging going on for consensus too, and the gas price spiked. And that's just what happens. Eventually, you do hit your cap, and then the gas price goes up. But the proof of stake systems, they boosted it way above where Ethereum and Bitcoin can do. Instead of being hundreds a second, they're talking about tens of thousands, and we haven't seen the adoption necessary to really push those limits yet. But I think by the end of the decade, we're going to see it.
Yeah, we'll see.
So we were working on consensus. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be this year. I think we'll see things spiking, and we'll see some of the popular platforms hitting that cap, and people being wait, what? I thought the gas price was low. It's no, it's you got enough adoption that you're at your cap now, and all right, it's time to talk about layer 2s. Layer 2s are a whole different topic and are an answer to a lot of things.
Yeah,
especially in gaming. I would say in trading, Like, so this trading and settlement to me is always something that can take a little bit longer,
Mhm.
whereas trading is always a race to the bottom. I mean, I did have frequency trading for long enough, like, just analyzing it at the SEC, that I'm like, all right, like the
Right.
faster it is, the better it is. So like you always want it faster.
Yeah.
Gaming to a certain extent too, where like a more centralized, faster solution is generally better
Yeah.
from the user
Frictionless,
perspective.
as frictionless as possible.
Yeah, and it's a feature of what you're doing. Like
Mhm.
that makes sense. And it's
Mhm.
okay that it's a little bit more centralized, and because like you want that like crazy performance that you can get out of a centralized database, but you want to have it more decentralized than, just some company running a single server.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
so yeah, we were working on our consensus algorithm for our public network, and discovered, invented, whatever, this thing called Chainweb. And Chainweb is a way to horizontally scale a blockchain. It's much more and we are a proof of work network, and it's proof of work that allows us to actually use this technique. It's not a hub and spoke like we see in other platforms where you have like your kind of super chain and then you have a bunch of other side chains that have kind of roll up to the main one. It is right now we have 20 chains all running in parallel. And when you mine a block on one of the chains, it refers to its previous block and then a few of the peers in the network, a few of the other chains' previous blocks too, but not all of them. There's a bunch of
Interesting.
graph theory that goes into how this gets efficient. We've run tests of, I think the biggest test we ever ran was 5,000 chains being mined and executing transactions in parallel. We run simulations into the millions of chains in parallel.
Wow.
But right now we just run 20 because, we need to justify, like, basically the idea with Kadena is that as adoption increases, we're going to run into our throughput capacity cap. And then the gas price is going to start to go up. And then once that happens, then it's like, all right, well, it's time to upgrade the network to have more chains. So instead, because initially we launched with 10 chains in parallel, and then hard forked, I think it was 9 months or a year later, to 20 chains, just to show that, okay, you can actually horizontally scale a blockchain in production.
Right.
The best way to think of it is a multi-core CPU, frankly, where like you just have more and more and more cores.
Yeah.
There are limits in silicon of how many cores you can have,
Yeah.
but because it's a distributed system, it's much more like how you would scale a Web2 partitioned database. So like partitioning and sharding, like those are so used now in crypto that we don't tend to use those words because people are like, oh, like this, like near is sharded. It's like it's not really sharded. It's sort of sharded, but it's not really the same, not in the way that like we think of Web 1 or Web 2 and historically how databases were actually like hard partitioned across from each other.
Right.
So that you could just throw more servers and like as like Google needs to scale,
it's
they
a
can
bit
just
of a
throw servers at
software.
it.
There is some hardware component, but it's a lot more kind of just programmed in, right?
Yeah, it's not a thing where like you can just like throw more stuff at it and it literally just goes wider.
Right.
There is still a centralized locking system in how like sharding works in proof of stake systems. They do allow you to have higher performance, and it's really an addressing trick. But anyway, we don't want to get too technical.
Yeah, no.
Anyway, so this is what makes us really different is that we're proof of work and we got like 20 chains running in parallel, and we're actually planning on upgrading our network to increase from 20 to 40, hopefully by the end of this year. And those new 20 chains are going to actually be running EVM because there's no reason that we can't run EVM or other things. So the first step is going to be.
So then you're getting into layer 2 territory essentially then?
Well, this is the weird part and the hard thing to describe of like, are we a layer 1 or a layer 2? And my approach
as of right now, it sounds like you're layer 1, but if you jump on the EVM, I feel like that puts you in layer 2, right? I don't know.
From my point of view, the best layer 2 is layer 1 that scales. The reason that you got a layer 2 is because your gas fees are too high in your layer 1 and you need more throughput. But we don't have that problem. We can just expand it out and double our capacity. And the reason for doing EVM is just that there's so much already integrated there, and the development scene is just so robust that we like the idea of having half the network running EVM. And then the idea being that if people come on and start to adopt the EVM side, they can also then start to experiment with the pack side because all these things are peers. They're all running in parallel. It's just like think of it like a single blockchain, except it just keeps getting fatter and fatter.
Wow.
And you can go from one to the other.
So the framing is horizontal scaling versus kind of the traditional way that other blockchains have been trying to scale. It is still proof of work. It expanded recently from 10 to 20 chains. So what are these current 20 chains kind of performing? What are they functioning for? What's kind of your main use case right now? And did you say it's Kadena? Is it Kadena and not Kadena? Just want to make sure.
Kadena.
Okay.
I don't really correct people.
Right.
It varies depending on who's going to say it.
Right,
I always say Kadena, but it's not a big deal.
Okay.
So I mean, what are our main use cases right now? We have a few community-driven stuff. The normal dexes. We have a bridge rolling out. Finally, we have a bridge rolling out. Because of my SEC background, we had to be very careful and specific in how we did a bridge
Okay.
versus just kind of like doing one and us holding the keys, which a
As
lot
it
of other
bridged
players have done.
to Ethereum,
As a
or
bridge to this is initially it's going to be Ethereum, but then we're working with Hyperlane for this. It's initially going to be to Ethereum, but then I think we're rolling out another 20, like either 10 or 20 links before I think the end of Q2.
nice,
So
nice.
we'll finally be having a proper bridge going across. I mean, there's a number of dexes that run on the platform. There's a big IoT project that's been running on the platform for a long time, and they've been really leveraging the capacity that we have. Yeah, they're called
Cool.
Crank, and they've been fantastic. And
Cool.
just because we have, they actually figured out how to horizontally scale their application onto these horizontal chains, and it's been really useful for them because they don't ever have to worry about gas fees. They're like, oh, and like if like as their protocol has taken off, we've even talked about internally, like, hey, do we need to upgrade the network for them? It's not at that point yet, but like they take up a decent amount of our throughput right now, which is great.
Nice, nice. And when you say
on
IoT,
top of
that's Internet of Things, and so it's like a real world, kind of like a DeepIn situation, or how are they using it?
So I don't know the specifics of it. I believe that it's closer to I think it's closer to I think it's Oxygen is the one that it's closer to. It's a bit of like Internet of Things, but it's also kind of a distributed internet type thing. Okay. I really need to hang out with those guys
Crank,
more. But
yeah,
we
I'll check it out. It sounds
been
interesting. Any kind of real world use case, and the Internet of Things just seems like a natural fit for good usable blockchain where it is, like you say, scalable and not going to add a bunch of extra fees for not a real good reason, right? Unless there's a real reason to pay those fees, it's not going to be something that businesses are looking at. Awesome. So I think you took us through a lot of the kind of technical background and what brought you to the creation of Kadena. What do you think would be the kind of mission and vision of Kadena? Obviously, you're positioning it as the blockchain for business. It does sound like it definitely has some decentralized angles as far as it is proof of work. You're looking at horizontal scalability. You're even looking at EVM compatibility, which is awesome. Like you say, you can attract a lot more developers, and you can, of course, tap into kind of the network effect of the Ethereum ecosystem. So that's a lot. So what would you say is kind of the mission and vision, and how are you kind of progressing towards that right now?
Yeah, Kadena's the blockchain, like our blockchain, it's purpose built to meet the demands for businesses and traditional financial institutions. It's why I went so much into the background of how we got here, is to kind of motivate what we're doing is we've literally built this thing for what we thought real institutional adoption needs by the end of the decade. And it sounds a bit weird because we've been talking about this for 10 years at this point, or 9 years at this point.
I think we're all like a broken record at this point in the crypto space. We're talking to each other.
No, I mean more as we've been talking about this, things that we had already built all of a sudden became features for other people. And we're just they're like, guys, we did this 3 years ago. This is, you need to do this. We know we need formal verification built into the smart contract language if we're going to have real financial adoption long term. Unless we want to do things, if we want to do things that are beyond just simple tokens, NFTs, that sort of thing.
Right.
But our mission is to power the future of global finance, and it's bringing both traditional institutional finance on chain and providing infrastructure for more detailed, more retail focused and DeFi applications to innovate and thrive. So that's awesome. At the core.
Bringing TradFi and institutional entities on chain is a pretty lofty goal. So you were mentioning in your background there, like you had a bit of background in the SEC. You worked at JP Morgan, kind of helping out with that kind of solution that they had built. At one point they had their JPM coin or whatever. I don't know, does that still exist? I'm not too sure.
It does. It still runs on Core. It runs on Quorum though. They I mean, because Stuart and I left, so they couldn't really keep using ours. We open sourced it, and then we're just we're gonna leave and found a company now.
And build on top of it. We'll talk to you guys later. Yeah, no doubt. Okay, and you mentioned there that you couldn't actually own any crypto at that point when you were working on these projects, so that was like a prerequisite. Like you could not be an investor in crypto because basically, obviously, conflict of interest. You might just be trying to get one of your coins to go up in value, and I just think that's really fascinating. So I do want to get your input because it sounds like you have a lot of knowledge in this space. obviously Trump's coming in. A lot of people think that, it's just going to go to the moon from here and all the regulators are going to be on side. But how do you see this actually evolving from here? And how does a Kadena kind of fit into that solution when we're looking at a future of real world assets being tokenized, a future of people buying and selling art more commonplace on the blockchain via NFTs, as, I like to do and many of my friends like to do. Mm-hmm. So, how does Kadena fit into that, and how is the kind of institutional side adapting to this? And I know you mentioned also BlackRock, I think, earlier, as far as what they've done, but that's very financial instrument and kind of investor side focused, not really real world application focused. So yeah, just love to hear your thoughts on any of those.
I think the integration is going to be pretty widespread. And yeah, with the Trump administration coming in, it's more that I think that the SEC is going to be more willing to have more experimentation that is U.S. centric. I think that I think that the regulators aren't going to be as like, I don't want to get into the politics of like Tornado Cash and some of the other stuff, because that one is a whole mess of there's a part of you should just be able to put code out onto a blockchain that's autonomous, and it shouldn't be illegal in pretty much any situation. And there's the whole conspiracy aspect, but I haven't followed the case in super detail, so there's I don't even really want to get into that side of it. But I think that from a regulatory point of view, there's going to be less pressure. There's going to be more willingness to see experimentation, and with that, the banks are already have been looking at this and have switched their focus from private chains to public chains. And it's really, I think, because of BlackRock. There's a ton of capital that's in here, but also there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained through integration with these platforms. And finding partners that both have the experience in traditional finance and have the network and the system already built up, and frankly having ones that are having an option that's proof of work, and that is proof of work is, we found, to be a pretty big deal when it comes to banks, because they from a security and this is more of a network security point of view, but also just a safety of the network thing. They really like proof of work because they understand it much, because of Bitcoin, they understand it much more. Okay. And they also realize that a proof of stake system, you could have people who get pissed off at us for doing something, and then they could start affecting the network in such a way that we can't do what we want to do. But having something that is actually fully decentralized through proof of work is something that they're very happy about, which is weird, because for the last 4 years-ish, we've been pushing back against the tide of proof of stake. And now that the institutions are hey, we want to actually work on a public chain, they're looking at our platform, they're wait, you have a scalable proof of work. They're this is a, if you actually want we think that the security of that and the safety of that matters. And we found that bigger, more conservative institutions actually agree with us. So it's been a really fun, past year and change. And recently we started working with Onera, and they have an entire real world asset platform that we fully integrated with, and we're going to be doing POCs with them, talking to just a ton of different banks. And it's really just in the last, I would say it really is since BlackRock that banks started to kind of relight their blockchain integration team. They're oh wait, BlackRock actually got this through, and there's a ton of trapped capital here, and people have been telling us that, hey, we should actually be integrating with this for a long time. And now someone got it through the regulatory roadblock in the US, and all of a sudden all the other banks are all right, we're behind, and we actually have to catch up now. Nice, so it's been a very exciting time over the last year.
That's pretty cool. I hadn't thought of the idea that banks are now at a level of knowledge where they at least see the difference between a proof of work versus a proof of stake, and the value in the public decentralized network. Yeah, that is surprising to me, frankly, but that's awesome. I don't think our Canadian banks are nearly there yet, but hopefully we get there eventually. But yeah, that's fascinating. So how do you think that's going to kind of play out in the real world, though, right? Because I feel like Solana is definitely, you've already seen some partnerships with Visa, they're definitely kind of trying to angle in on the institutions. We have Ethereum, where, of course, to your point, the scalability issue is a big asterisk on it, but they do have programmability. They obviously have a very decentralized network. And I think they're looking at more real world use cases like voting and certain things that they think should be kind of in a more decentralized network. But they're also looking at institutions and banks and trying to pitch there. And then we hear this whole conversation about XRP, and apparently XRP's got this great, inroad with all of the regulators and trying to get in with the institutions. So I guess how does a Kadena kind of fit into that? And and you've kind of spoken to the value. You're ones actually scaling the proof of work, but do you see yourselves kind of in competition with an XRP or a Solana, and how do you see that kind of evolving?
I would say, I mean, are we in a competition? Technically speaking, yes, because we're in the same industry, but actually not that much because the industry is in such a growth phase and it's going to be, I foresee, for at least the next 10 years, but really over the next 4 or 5. Again, like 2030 has been the date that I was looking at since the beginning of like, all right, when are we going to see real adoption? And there's just so much room to grow in that it's a rising tide raises all boats type situation.
Nice.
And I think that we're going to see, certain applications make more sense on our platform. Things where it's more towards the settlement side than the payments or the trading side, I think make the most sense on Kadena. And as we expand to be this kind of weird layer 1, layer 2 hybrid thing, it's a layer 1, but people are going to look at it and be like, oh, you're a layer 2. It's like, yeah, we're a decentralized layer 1 that scales, which sort of looks like a layer 2, and whatever. People will figure it out eventually. And the marketing team, I've been working with them for so long to help try to like figure out exactly how to like pitch this so that it makes sense to people. But there's certain applications I think they're going to make a lot of sense. For like cross-border, like fast cross-border transfers, for example, could make a lot of sense on Ripple. It's weird still hearing about Ripple, but whatever. They've run the business pretty well.
Yeah.
Solana, when it comes to like Visa and payments, that makes a lot of sense. The weird part I've always had is that when you bring up Visa, is that we have these traditional payment rails, and like the Visa network, I think involves something like 120 or 150 kind of there's sort of like off ramps where like as the payments are getting routed through the network, they're kind of these like third party off ramps that are inside of the Visa network, and they feel a lot like, from the consensus there to me, like a validator. And it's like, all right, like, so the Visa network has like 130 sort of validators that run their network, but they're fully regulated and they're not considered decentralized. And then you look at other like proof of stake systems where like, yeah, you have like a lot of validators, but really you have like 8 or 10.
And you're considered decentralized somehow.
Yeah, I'm like, this has always been my concern. I mean, with the Trump administration coming in, I think that the concern about basically regulators pointing out that a proof of stake network that only has like that has the majority of the votes and let's say 10 validators just isn't enough to be considered decentralized. I think the risk of that is very, very much diminished. I think if it had been another Democratic another 4 years of like the SEC being run by Democrats, that would actually be a much more serious concern. I mean, there's already the concern about Ethereum, like did they turn it into a security by going proof of stake? And there's a pretty strong argument to be made that like, all right, like you get voting rights and you get a dividend. Looks a lot like a security to me. So, but that one's going to be, I don't think that's really going to be an issue anymore.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting if that whole security conversation goes, and just how I don't know what the word would be, but it seems to be there's a focus on like having it US based, right? Like US based innovation versus the other cryptos. So that'll be kind of a priority, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because Ethereum is sufficiently international. It started out in Canada. I think it's officially kind of started legally in the Caymans or something. But it's really interesting to see how that's going to play out, and I do hope, like you said, kind of rising tide lifts all boats, and the whole achievable market is massive. And I like what you were saying about how maybe your use case is more on the settlement side, whereas Solana would be on quick transactions and payments, and maybe Ripple has the cross-border kind of remittance thing kind of being set up. So that's pretty cool. So I guess I'm curious, like, how is it that you're embracing the proof of work and avoiding some of the higher gas fees? Because I know that's the main thing, right? That's why Ethereum jumped into proof of stake. It's why I think Solana uses proof of stake, and a lot of these other kind of low gas fee or other chains that are trying to address the gas fee problem have all adopted proof of stake. So I'm assuming it has something to do with that horizontal scaling that you mentioned earlier. But are you still ultimately going to have, somewhat high fees on the network because it's proof of work, and it's just something that, like you were saying earlier, for security purposes is okay to a point? And how are you managing that kind of fee conversation?
So from my point of view, or my understanding of it, is like gas fees increase because you have this very much a basic gas fee that's required by the network. Early on when we had first launched the network, the gas fees were so low that people were just coming on and griefing for a bit. But now they're at the point where it seems like some people every once in a while someone will just like throw in a bunch of nonsense transactions, but like it's not free. to do. So at that point, like, okay, like, why am I doing this? So like, so long as the gas fee's there, that's like the safety aspect from my point of view. But every time it gets higher on any network, that's by virtue of the network getting congested. Fees are a measure of network congestion, and network congestion is caused by virtue of your network hitting its capacity or getting close, because you have a bunch of transactions in the mempool and people want them to go in a certain order because either they want their transaction done faster than other ones, or they want to, hit something on a DEX in time and they don't want to wait. So they increase the gas fee so that a miner picks it up earlier. It's all market driven.
Mm.
So if you don't have the issue of hitting congestion, of having a congested network, because you can actually scale the thing horizontally, then there's no pressure for the gas price to ever go up beyond that very minimal baseline. And yeah, people move to proof of stake to decrease their gas fees, and it works as kind of like a one-time hit because you can increase your throughput. And another technique that people use is a concurrent execution model. So Solana does this, Near does this, where transactions that aren't related directly can run in parallel. It doesn't matter which one runs first, so long as when eventually it just needs to be consistent. Because like I trade with you, you trade with someone else hits a DEX, and in some other case, like I traded with someone, they traded with someone else, and that person hits a DEX. And from the point of view of when the DEX is getting that transaction, the transactions that came before need to be consistent enough. And that's kind of like a centralization point of logically of how the application is running on the network. So if you have a concurrent model, you can run a bunch of transactions in parallel, but they do end up centralizing. Like you end up bottlenecking the network when it comes to killer apps. So like you have an Uber that rolls out on top of a concurrent model on a concurrent network. And let's say a third of the users are using that Uber app on a regular basis. That means that instead of it being kind of infinitely horizontally executable, where you can just have just stuff running completely in parallel, you need to be syncing up a lot, because in computer science it's called the small world problem, where there's just things aren't really that disconnected. You kind of have these hubs of popularity that always cause you to have to figure out what your logical consistency is, even if you don't have to have perfect temporal consistency.
Wow.
So for us, the fees are just about making sure that we never have a congested network. And the answer to that is, well, we can double the size of the network. We can't do it on demand, but as the network gets more adoption and we see the blocks start to be like 30, 50, 80% always packed, then it's like, all right, well, it's time to upgrade the network. And then we double the size of it, or we add 30 chains to it. And the miners are totally into this, because it doesn't cost much more for them to actually mine the network and secure it. Because the hash rate, when we went from 10 to 20 chains, the amount of hashing that was going into the network was actually the same. You would take the amount of the difficulty for each block, and if you double the network, you just drop the difficulty by half for each block. So the miners are still working the exact same hardness. They have to pay a little bit more, but this is like a 1 or 2% more just in server costs to run the node for the new chains. But the vast majority of the money that's going into securing the network is going into mining, and the mining isn't affected by how much we scale. So one of the beauties of the system is that as we scale up, all the transactions get more efficient from an energy point of view, because that hash power is getting used to do more and more work.
Okay. So you mentioned when it does come time to need to scale, and like you mentioned, going from 10 to 20 chains, what does the governance look like, right? I believe you did allude to some kind of centralized point, acknowledging the need to expand and then quickly kind of adding on these new chains. What does the governance of that look like? And I guess how easy is it to be a miner in the Kadena ecosystem? Two questions there.
I'll answer it in reverse. So being a miner is super easy. We're ASICs. I'm a believer in ASICs. I think that they really secure the network. It makes it very hard for someone to do a nice hash attack or anything like that. And there's multiple ASIC providers that make ASICs for our network. And if you want to mine the network, you buy an ASIC, or I think there's a couple decentralized marketplaces that allow you to kind of rent, where you buy a pro rata share of the miners they run, and they take a fee, and then you get coins out. And then your first question was, what does the governance look like? Right now, it's just community driven. I mean, we're just in touch with the community. I wish that we had more non-Kadena developers developing the network, but we don't. The network's written in Haskell and is very high quality, so we don't really need that many developers maintaining the network, and
Haskell's
upgrading
the same
it
as Cardano, right? I think it's the only other one. using
I think,
Haskell?
yeah, I think Cardano's the only one that was written in Haskell as well. I know that, oh, who was it? The Insane Clown Posse coin, ICP.
Right.
They,
Internet. Yeah.
yeah, Internet Computer,
Right.
whatever. I forget
Yeah.
the proper name. Anyway,
Protocol, I
yeah, I know
think. Yeah.
they tried to write it in Haskell, but then they switched to Rust. We got their CTO.
Oh,
So John
okay.
Wigley is like now at
He's
our
like,
place. I don't
oh,
know if he
you're
was the
abandoning
CTO.
Haskell. I'm out of
Just
here.
yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
So but yeah, the way it works is, I mean, right now it's literally just it's a configuration flag in the code. And that was how we did the first upgrade. Like there's a little more timing involved where you need to say like, oh, like swap this configuration variable at this block height. And we need to let everyone else, like we need to let the miners know that, hey, like this is going to be happening. And if they don't want to do it, then they don't install the update. So it's very much like it isn't as specific as how Bitcoin does it, but we haven't had a need because we've never gotten into a fight with our miners, because we designed this from the belief that like, no, mining is big business and we like our miners because they secure the network. What we want is to be able to scale it, and the miners have all been like, no, this makes sense. Like if you guys need to scale it, then like we'll just install the
Nice.
update. So we've never had really any issues with them. So we haven't had to develop it any more than just kind of like everyone just kind of chats on like Telegram or Signal or WhatsApp or Discord, and then was like, yeah, so we're doing like you guys up for doing like an upgrade? They're like, yeah, we're up for doing an upgrade. That's it.
Nice. Well, I got to jump on your Discord. That sounds pretty cool. So you just buy an ASIC and you can set yourself up as a Kadena miner. That's pretty legit. Easy enough. So would you say like that the main goal of your blockchain is essentially like a B2B institutional solution? Is there a use case for your average kind of retail level user, or even like in the whole creator economy conversation that we see kind of coming up? And obviously it's a big focus of this show when we talk to a lot of artists, a lot of gamers, a lot of creators in the space that are using blockchain in kind of creative ways to create opportunity for themselves, but also create fun experiences kind of at the retail level for your average person out there. Is that something Kadena's looking at, or is it very much just kind of B2B institutional solutions and that's it?
And it's easier for me to talk about the B2B institutional stuff because that's more been my focus and kind of
Right.
the infrastructure around that. But yeah, it's I mean, one of the things we have when it comes to like, let's say NFTs, is we have our Marmalade standard. And one of the really cool parts of it is it has this extremely flexible programmable policy mechanism inside of it. I've wanted for a long time to actually kind of take that standard and be like, oh, we're also just going to upgrade the way that we think about like equity in companies, and just have programmable equity inside of it, because you can have royalties that roll up, as like transactions are going through or as other things are happening. You can have like a fully programmable way of just allocating things to either the creator or to participants. I can't even really go into the details like in a significantly good way because I didn't work on it. I just like, I used it a bit and I was like, okay, this can do kind of anything. So it's it's adding like an additional like meta programming layer almost on top of the NFT, which you should in theory be able to do with, Solidity and Ethereum, and you probably sort of can, but it's not anywhere near as flexible as the thing that we've built in. And that's just by virtue of Pact being Pact and our smart contract language, just having a lot of the stuff from the beginning, knowing that, hey, we're going to need to have like securities that have like our nesting doll of programmable layers inside of them and can do some really weird things with it.
Wow, awesome. So as of right now, not necessarily like an NFT marketplace or any kind of real focus as far as that is.
There
up and
is
running?
one.
There is one? Okay.
It's just not. I'm not the right person from the company.
Okay.
Because my co-founder is, he's primarily he is the CEO of the company, but he's also he's been a musician forever, and he did tech so that he could pay for his musician habit.
Nice.
And or like so he can cover so have a good life but also be a musician. And he's been a musician for freaking ever. And his wife actually is my wife's violin teacher too. She's
wow.
Violinist as well.
Small world.
And my COO is very much in the art scene. So like they were the ones who focus more on it, because I've told them like, look, like I don't do the arts and I don't do music, and you guys are so passionate about this that like just take it. Like focus on other stuff. Like, you guys do such an amazing job with it. That was the only unfortunate part when I saw that we were doing this. I'm like, I know you're gonna want to talk about him. It's like I am not the guy for the NFTs from the company. We have so many others that are so in that scene that I'm just not.
Cool. Well, at least it's on the radar. That's what's most important.
Oh yeah.
And then I guess on the kind of metaverse conversation as well, is that something that your team or anyone is really looking at as far as this kind of what has been referred to as the always-on immersive experience that is the metaverse? So you just jump into the digital space, and when we talk about real-world asset tokenization, I think it's in the metaverse where these tokens can actually be kind of engaged with, and maybe you get 3D digital versions of the real-world asset that you can then use or show off in the metaverse. Is that part of the equation at all right now for Kadena?
I think that we started working with some metaverse stuff early on, but it didn't really take off in the way that we were hoping. And instead, we focused much more on Marmalade and NFTs. One of our advisors is Stuart Haber, who was one of the most referenced people from the initial like Satoshi Bitcoin white paper.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to like his initial, because he's the guy who invented the concept of a blockchain, not like as in the data structure, not as in like the decentralized ledger type of thing. Right. And he's been, I don't know if you like any of the background of this, like where the first blockchain has been running, but it's been running in the New York Times in the classified section for I think like 20 years at this point, or 30 years at this point. They made this company. So it's doing digital notary. So you could send in documents and then they hash them, and then they collect that parent hash, and it goes into, I think it's the Sunday Times, or the Sunday classified section. They just they buy a little spot and they publish the hash, because then that hash is replicated to every library in the world. And the idea is that you can go and prove that this document was submitted at this time by going into any library, having, you need a little bit of software to basically be able to put in that hash. You can go and look up, okay, on this date, the New York Times in this library had this hash. And I was told that when you send in the thing, you get back the Merkle tree, and you can then go and you can verify that, okay, like this document was actually part of this hash that was inside of the New York Times. I think they do 2 different hashes because they wanted to make sure that they're one of them wasn't going to get undermined.
Wow.
And
redundancies.
So incredible. So he wanted to do a NFT for that first paper, and I think we did that about a year ago. Okay. Putting that on chain.
Nice. So it's definitely on the radar. People see the value in it, and over time, I'm sure more will be built out. So I guess, how is the real world asset tokenization evolution happening? Like, are you seeing real estate being purchased on chain through tokens? Where do you see kind of the biggest demand and the biggest kind of value, I guess, from tokenizing assets in this? Like right now in 2025,
I've always loved the idea of the tokenized real estate, but I've always found that the places that could benefit from it the most don't even have good real estate records already. So you end up with this problem where, okay, you have this digital record of it, but someone goes and pays off a judge in this location, or like in this like locale, and all of a sudden, your stake doesn't actually matter.
Right.
So, I mean, hopefully we get a little bit of clarity on exactly how that should be regulated, because it also sort of securitization, and there's a bunch of problems around that. I've always loved the idea. It's just like the places that it's the most useful don't really have the social contract infrastructure to really support it yet. I know people are trying. I know it's getting better, and I love them for doing it. We don't focus too much on that, though. I think that the biggest demand is, tokenization of funds. Also, just having a platform where you can have, public settlement onto a blockchain. At least for us, it's the ability to have public settlement onto a blockchain and not ever have to worry about the gas fees. When we talk to banks, that's the thing they're most excited about. It's like, all right, your proof of work. So you're properly decentralized. We don't have to get into the nuances of how many validators you have and who owns those coins and blah, 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 blah. But also we can actually integrate with you. We just never have to worry about having, just hitting the capacity of the network. A lot of actually not a lot, I would say like 3 of the banks we're talking to right now have this issue where they've actually done an integration already, and they've now hit the throughput cap of either the private chain they were using or the public chain that they were using. Like, we don't really want to spend the money on these gas fees to increase it, but we're getting more demand and we want to do more with this. So it's we're talking with a fair number of people who are actually looking to do a migration because of that. And it's literally just because, all right, you have a platform that I can sit down with you for 10 minutes and explain how we're scaled to our point now and how we scale up should you adopt, and all of a sudden take up all the throughput of the network and the gas fee goes up. It's like, all right, we're going to double the number of chains. Here's the graph looks like. Here's the setting in the code. We've done this before. It's not a big deal.
Wow, that's pretty amazing that you can actually just offer that solution and then allow them to kind of transition. So just funds, hey, that's really fascinating. I would have thought there was more kind of actual hard assets that are being tokenized, but I could see the value in definitely having the kind of on-chain funds for settlement and public settlement internally. And so you're saying these private internal blockchain solutions, however, like distributed ledger technology would be another way to describe them, right? Are essentially capping out and not really providing the solution that they promised to provide for a lot of these banks?
They did provide the solution for a bit, but then they found that they were useful, and then they started using them more, and then all of a sudden,
and it's a database, so you don't want to have to delete old data. The whole point is to keep all the data on it, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's not even the database problem. It's just that it can only do. Cost. I mean, a lot of these ones are a little bit older, so they can only do, let's say, 500 transactions a second max, and that's just not enough. Because I think that back in the day, God, like 4 years ago, banks were doing the internal stuff because they couldn't get it through compliance to try to talk to a public blockchain. So they had to do the internal stuff. And they were the early adopters to saw the promise. They got the stuff up and running. JP Morgan Coin is a good example. They really do use that thing globally at this point. But it's going to have if they were to try to take it and expand it to be more, they would run into this issue of to do more stuff. They'd either have to have separate individual deployments, which they don't really want to do, because then now they have to manage like multiple clusters of multiple blockchains, or they need to find a solution that actually can scale up, because it's just it's not even a concurrent runtime for Quorum, so it can only do so many EVM transactions a second, because EVM is not slow, but it's not the fastest language in the world. It wasn't built to be super fast. It was built to be steady.
That's true. Yeah, steady and reliable, and not a security risk. That's really fascinating, man. So do you think a JP Morgan eventually is going to come back around to Kadena and be like, we're going to need this?
Who knows?
Who knows? Eh?
Who knows? Even if you'll find out through the press release when that happens. Should that happen? Because it's just one of those ones where it's like, we talk with people, but oh my God, the NDAs.
No doubt. So I think you've hit on this kind of data or the security measures piece and how important that is, and why kind of being on chain helps with that. But you've also mentioned on the website somewhere the zero knowledge proofs, and the idea that transactions can be confirmed without the kind of more sensitive privacy information being exposed. Right now, we've seen this kind of conversation in the Ethereum space around potential for voting and for actual real world governance, and the ability to vote and then use zero knowledge proof to confirm that you voted, but nobody can see how you voted, for example. And then we could have that for all of the citizens, and nobody's voting twice. Who's voted, and there's no questions about any sketchiness, because it's all transparent and on chain, right? So I guess how, in your context with Kadena, does the zero knowledge proof kind of factor in, and how important is that kind of piece of technology for what you're providing?
So our zero knowledge integration right now is more focused around bridging and having a properly decentralized but also blinded bridging. Going back and forth between our network and other ones. We've been working with Lurk, who's now called Argument, on this. And it's just succinct proofs. I mean, it's the cutting edge stuff, but it's the normal stuff that chains with zero knowledge have. Getting to Ethereum's use case for it. Yeah, I love that use case.
Yeah,
I'd love to see it in real life. I don't know where they're going to adopt proper voting, but in general, and having decentralized communities, and really their angle of going to be more zero knowledge roll up focused makes a ton of sense to me. As they're going to be just a beacon for being able to roll these things up, and then have their network of layer 2s that are doing stuff on the side. Makes a ton of sense. But zero knowledge, it's a cryptographic method, and we have it as a primitive, and you can use it. And having protectable privacy is it's fantastic. The problem with zero knowledge is that it's computationally expensive, and it's always going to be pretty computationally expensive. So I think for things like voting, it makes more sense than for things like trading, for example.
Right.
Like rolling up, having individual trades, because to me, trading, the transactional volume of trading is always going to be way higher than the transactional volume of settlement. So zero knowledge to me, one of the big reasons we have zero knowledge integrated is because we're much more focused on settlement-like applications than we are specifically trading ones. Because trading, again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but it always ends up being kind of a race to who can do the most transactions in the least period of time. And the answer to that is always going to be, you go more and more and more centralized, because as you centralize it more, you can run it faster. And we see this with stock exchanges, and it's not a complicated, or it's not a controversial opinion. Just be like, look, you can do more trading with a centralized server. That's just how it works. You can do more gaming with a centralized server. That's just how it works. If you're doing like high speed real time stuff.
Right. Awesome. So to loop back around to kind of my initial question and wanting to get to kind of how decentralized is Kadena and what's the kind of overall mission. It's very clear to me now that you have a decentralized proof of work system, and that you offer horizontal scaling, which is really a good use case for, like you say, banks and institutions that see the value in the proof of work system. And then so the point of centralization may be in the governance side of things, but from what I hear, you're kind of open to a more decentralized future when it comes to the governance piece, and you are, factoring in what the miners think and what their feedback is already. Are you interested in the whole DAO conversation? Is there a kind of governance token that you're using? Is there, what's can you get a little bit more into the governance as we wrap up?
Yeah, so we have this thing called Kadena Cabinet, and it's a DAO that the plan is for us to have all of this just be DAO community driven.
Okay.
And we've been using it for the last, I think it took us a little bit longer than we wanted to get it to launch. The quality of the code was a little bit sketchy in the beginning, but it's been fixed.
Okay.
So it's been running for, I think, the last like 6 or 9 months now, something like that.
Nice.
And we're planning on putting more and more and more stuff out there.
And you said
and
it was
actually moving a
Kadena
lot
Capital?
of our
Is that what you said?
Cabinet. Yeah.
Cool.
And so we're planning on moving more and more stuff out there. And also, it's just not been a super high priority for us to have a Bitcoin style upgrade path where, miners set the flag.
Right.
Just because we've never had any forks in the network where people disagree. It's one of those ones where, like, the second that we get any pushback on like anything that Cabinet wants to do, then we'll be like, all right, well, the number one thing on Cabinet is, hey, vote for like doing this upgrade to the protocol so that we can actually have voting by the miners directly.
Nice.
But it's just been so non-controversial that it's never been an issue. But we are planning on moving as much of the governance as we can into the Cabinet side of things and just having it run there, so that it can just be community driven. And that's basically a staking protocol where we put up some coins. If you put up some coins, you get some voting block. You get a return, and the Kadena Foundation itself just funds where that return comes from. Like, put a pool of coins in there, and you want to make a return on your coins and have a say in the community. That's how it runs, because we want it to be much more community driven. We're hoping to move a lot of our grants to there in the future instead of having them run through us more. We'd rather have Cabinet just have a lump of coins and can just be like, oh, for this project, you have a critical mass of people voting for you, so take it.
Nice. And what is the governance token that you use right now, or the main coin you're using?
Well, for that, so Kadena Cabinet, you get, when you put in your coins, then you get a voting stake on it. I don't remember the exact name of it. I think it's more just an account-driven thing where, you have the ability to vote based on it. I'm sure there's some representation of a coin on it, but it's really just Kadena Cabinet.
Okay. And interesting. And so are you actively kind of trying to get more miners as far as kind of expanding the nodes, expanding the network? Is this like a major focus, or you're pretty comfortable with the kind of current network that you have? And, anyone who wants to jump on, buy an ASIC, jump on, but it's not like a huge concern or focus for you?
Nah, we're pretty well ASIC and we're pretty well secured. So it's never been it's just market driven.
Right.
People like miners who we get along really well with people who are very pro Bitcoin. People who care about that decentralization of proof of work.
Right.
We get along super well with them, and they're usually miners, or at least they're amenable to being a miner. So they run into us and they're like, all right, they want to get involved. And it's mostly just a question of, okay, does this make financial sense for me to get involved or not?
Right.
But no, I wouldn't say that we need to expand our mining network. We're it's secured well more than we need. So, or not more than we need. You can never have enough.
Never more. Yeah, exactly. Right. The more the better.
Yeah.
But that's awesome that it is that secure already. You're pretty comfortable with it. Yeah. Very cool. So I know you mentioned the bridging and kind of looking at EVM, and you've already expanded from 10 to 20 chains. What are you looking at in 2025? What do you anticipate? Is there going to be further expansion of these chains? Is the bridge kind of priority number one? What's the kind of main goals for Kadena?
Getting the bridge finally finished is a crazy high priority, because we've been trying to get it finished for months and months and months, and it just keeps getting like a little bit delayed and a little bit delayed. So yeah, but that one should be out in the next week. That bridge should finally be out.
Nice.
Getting the zero knowledge bridge should be out before, I think, the end of Q2. At least with it going, in a kind of proof of concept way on mainnet. Really excited to see that one actually launch too.
Wow.
Other stuff, yeah, we got a couple sports partnerships coming. One that I can't tell you about, it's just a big European football team, but the other one is Club Olympia.
Congrats.
Yeah, that one's going to be a lot of fun. But the other
Nice.
one is Club Olympia, which is one of the most prestigious soccer clubs in Paraguay and Latin America. We like our community actually went and figured out that we were working with them because they were going through the transactions on the platform. I'm like, hey, what's this Club Olympia thing? And then they got super excited. We actually like left it out there for them to find. We didn't leave it out there for them to find. We were working with them. We were working with the Club Olympia people, and
how are they using
communities
it?
went and found it. How are they using it? I am actually working on the other one. So again, like this was a, I believe it's going to be for some ticketing. I think it might also be for some NFT related stuff.
Nice.
The way that we're seeing soccer, football especially, get integrated with blockchains has been fascinating. I mean, there's a bunch of different crypto protocols that are working with different ones. I'm just glad we're not doing the sailing thing. Like I love the sail GP stuff, but it's always a bit silly when I watch this. I'm like, why are you guys sponsoring the sailors? I don't get it.
Yeah,
but it's pretty like the boats are super cool, so I sort of get
right. Yeah, and I mean crypto. Yeah, they like to put their sponsors on some random sports here and there, but to actually see the sport teams being the one taking the initiative to actually use the on-chain solution, whether it's for ticketing, whether it's for NFTs, some commemorative kind of collectible items, digital
engagement.
Collectibles.
It's all of that stuff.
That's amazing, man. That's really cool. That's really
and there's
cool.
been some talk of actually digitizing the rights to replays in NFTs.
Okay.
This is not Club
kind of like what NBA did, right, with their Top Shots thing, and they were kind of doing where they
I didn't know
clips.
about that one.
Yeah, I think it's called Top Shot. Now I'm questioning myself, but basically they had NBA highlights, and there were like different levels of rarity and exclusivity, and I can't remember how on chain it got, but that's kind of what they were looking at. So similar. NBA had something like that. So I'm curious on the bridge conversation, right? I know you mentioned Internet Computer Protocol, ICP. There's also like Cosmos, right? And the Atom, and they're very much focused on being like the bridge of bridges to like all these different networks. How do you position that, and is that kind of an angle you're looking at as far as offering that kind of bridge solution, but maybe in more of a proof of work and institutional context compared to maybe a Cosmos? But would you say that it's comparable to what Cosmos is doing?
I mean, I love the Cosmos, like that community and that project of like, I remember like we were both pitching side by side back in the day. Okay. So we were hanging out a lot at the conferences.
Nice.
They've always been great. And like their whole thing is bridging though. The whole thing is like having this network of bridgeable stuff.
Right.
We've tried to bridge a couple times to them. We've like had some internal development projects, but it's been pretty tricky going from proof of work to proof of stake for them. And also just the business demand hasn't ever really been that high for us to do it.
Right.
So like our bridge is really just about, is much more about DeFi and about getting access to capital and other networks. It's not as much about what they're doing, where they're trying to create this ecosystem of different applications that run on their own little chain and then can talk to a bunch of other stuff. There's a very different approach that I appreciate. It's just a lot of people don't want to run their own blockchain to be able to run their application. So I can see us being kind of a hub, like a decentralized hub for people to be bridging to and kind of routing through, but it would be more from the institutional perspective, I think, or the bigger player perspective that actually care about, okay, we actually want a properly decentralized, scalable, like kind of like thing to link to where we don't have to worry about what the gas fees are going to be. But I think that that's probably going to be in the next couple of years. I don't think that the industry is there yet. I'm just happy that they're able to, talk about the difference between proof of work and proof of stake, what the trade-offs are.
That is
like,
pretty fascinating, actually.
Yeah, because that one just turned around. Before it was like, why are you proof of work? Because we're decentralized.
Right.
Like, but, and then now it's much easier.
Yeah. And how much do you see yourselves factoring into the whole off-ramp conversation, right? Like, because you mentioned DEXs a lot, you mentioned DeFi, and so it seems to be a kind of core focus. Are institutions actually embracing DeFi at this point? Is that something that you're seeing from these conversations to kind of help, boost their revenue in the background? Are they actually actively participating in that? And then I think it always does ultimately come down to how easy is it to turn your DeFi gains into real world currency or fiat currency, as it were, that you can use, right? And see your gains in real value, right? That's always a bit of a friction point depending on where you are in the world, right? So is Kadena focused on that, either on the institutional level or even for your average kind of retail DeFi advocate and investor? How are you looking at that?
We're talking with a fair number of off-ramp providers, and again, it's a very similar thing of they want a a scalable layer one backend that is decentralized, and like they understand our story, but they're usually groups that have already built out something and have run into kind of the edges of what the existing technology solutions they've been using have been hitting, and that is what brings their interest over, usually to us. What I'm seeing from funds and their interest in DeFi is they're interested in the trapped capital that is just now trapped, like trapped value that is inside of crypto and getting access to that. And then along for the ride, they're also interested in the efficiency that comes from actually having a programmable database that you can use, and you don't even have to, you run your own node, but if your node goes down, you don't have to do a replay. You don't have to do a recovery from backups. Like things are already out there. You just start up a new one and resync.
Right, and it's right there. Yeah. Okay, so they're seeing the value in kind of that, but they're not necessarily getting involved in all of the staking and all of that. But they see the value kind of locked up in the crypto ecosystem, and they definitely want to get a piece,
but I think
piece
it'll
of the
get
pie.
there.
They'll get there though. Yeah. But you're not seeing interest
No, I think
from that.
These next 4 years, I suspect that we're going to see a lot of it out of, especially the U.S. funds. And being U.S. centric, man, I have regretted having Kadena be founded in the U.S. for so long, just because like it would have been easier for us had we done a Cayman's founding, or had we done a Swiss or something else. And now with the change, like, we're fully U.S. We've always been based in the U.S. We have a couple sub entities that aren't in the U.S.
You can be proudly American.
And it's like, no, we are a very American coin.
Wow. And with your background at SEC, I assume you're really covering all angles and feeling pretty bullish, feeling pretty comfortable about where you're at.
Yeah, especially from like the reg point of view, we just have no worries at this point. It's just, if they're coming after us, they're destroying the entire marketplace. They're destroying the entire ecosystem.
Wow.
Because like at this point, it's like, it's a proof of work coin that's been fully decentralized running for like 5 years, and we made very specific decisions that definitely hurt us in the beginning, from both just an adoption and a go-to-market point of view, because those decisions were much safer from a regulatory point of view.
Awesome. I'm curious about this kind of packed core concepts before I close up here. Can you explain a little bit about the packed smart contracts? And is this the basically programmable layer that you're using on Kadena?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is our scripting language. One quick way to kind of put it in context is, so when before Stuart and I met, he was at JP Morgan, and he rewrote one of their algorithmic trading engines. And he, in the process of rewriting the engine, like the execution layer and all the other stuff, he also rewrote the language that you use to program the engine to go and execute algorithms. And one of the big things he did is he made a scripting language that was designed for the traders to be able to directly use, as opposed to having the trader take down the details from a client, go to a programmer, and then go to the engineers, and have the engineers 2 months later come back with the actual algorithm written in Java. He made a little scripting language so they could go from trader, like it's called from the client. Trader is almost like live coding the thing while the client's in the call, and then within 2 to 3 days they would actually get into production, because the trader could just do the first draft of the code, give it to an engineer, the engineer reviews it, and then they just put it in and it starts running.
Ready to go.
So that was how he made his that was like his big success before we met.
Nice.
And so Pact is based on a lot of these principles too, where it's a scripting language that is designed for what you use a blockchain for. I mean, for the more technical people who are listening, you can think of it like a next generation SQL. It really is like SQL is a scripting language for databases. Pact is a scripting language for blockchains. And it's designed around, to do all the stuff that you need to on a blockchain without doing a bunch of the stuff that you don't do on a blockchain. So like I wouldn't try to, do an algorithm to solve the traveling salesman problem on a blockchain, because these things are all fundamentally limited by how many, gas, like the gas limits how much you can do on a chain, because it just has to. Otherwise, you could have someone put an infinite loop inside of a contract and then the chain just blocks.
Right.
So fundamentally, the transactions can't be that long-lived. So the scripting language is just designed around, how do you, like having data, protecting data, granting access, interacting, having code be able to interact. There's, we're over time at this point, so I don't want to go
No,
into
I love it. No, it's
a massive
amazing.
feature list.
Yeah, I
And
just
we're
wanted to
doing
confirm that was the programming kind of layer there, because I was just reviewing it a bit on the site there. Awesome, man. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you're really looking forward to in 2025 that you want to share with us? Obviously, the regulatory changes are welcomed by all of us crypto advocates, and hopefully they play out as well as many people seem to be hoping. But anything else you're really kind of excited about this year that you're looking forward to?
we already went over the big stuff of our upgrade of the network to, add 20 more parallel chains and have them run EVM. I'm super excited about that. There's other stuff that I'm excited about that I have in like big red letters in my briefing sheet that you are not allowed to say this. So
Nice.
Those ones I hope get announced.
Good job.
Very soon.
Good job not leaking any alpha for me. I appreciate it. Cool.
Man.
So I think we've covered all the rounds on Kadena. Thank you so much for your time, Will. I really will definitely be keeping an eye on that. I'm even going to be looking at the ASIC options, because I think it would be really cool as a network that's not quite as far along as a Bitcoin. Maybe the opportunity there is a little bit more accessible. So I'll put that out to all of our listeners as well. If you're looking for something that's going to be around for the long haul and has been, already put in 5 years of work and very clearly has a path to growth, Kadena might be one worth looking at and getting an ASIC there. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up here?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on. It's been a great chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. I appreciate it. Until next time, we'll catch you all in the metaverse. Peace out.